be talking about is acceptance and commitment therapy, specifically with children and adolescents. And even though presenting makes me nervous every single time I do it, I love it. It is extremely values consistent for me. And so I do a lot of opposite action and values-based action. So this is something I feel really excited to talk to you about today. As a therapist, I have really broad clinical interests in childhood trauma, bereavement. I really enjoy family systems work, working with behavioral dysregulation and anxiety and mood disorders. I do both therapy and assessment. Even though this feels like a little while ago, part of my training was as a school psychologist, and that feels really important to me, working with kids and working in with families, being familiar with those systems. So that feels like an important part of my identity. And I received my PsyD from Widener University, just outside of Philadelphia. And currently I'm the program director for our anxiety and mood team at Ucebt. So we see a really wide range of clients there. One of the most exciting pieces of ACT news that has come out recently is that ACT is now approved with, I think, moderate efficacy for children with chronic pain and health conditions. And so that's something that we do a little bit of on our team, in addition to, anxiety, social anxiety, depression, bipolar, all of those kinds of things. So I really like knowing who I'm talking to. And so I'm trying my hand at some technology here. We're going to try out a little bit of a poll so I can hopefully tailor our presentation to who we're talking to today. So Anya, our tech person, is hopefully going to help me out with a couple of poll questions that I believe should just pop up on your screen. And I just really am wanting to know, or hopefully get a little bit of information about who I'm talking to today. I took the APA definition for career stage here. Curious about what setting you're practicing in. And then, of course, what your exposure is to ACT. It's always a delicate balance trying to figure out, not wanting it to be boring or redundant for people, but also not wanting to speed so far ahead that none of it sticks or there's no hooks to hang the information on. Alrighty. The other reason why I'm excited to do things like polls is because I'm hoping that there's some interaction and some back and forth between us today, even if it ends up being nonverbal. And so I'm happy to see everyone participating in this way. Okay, I'll give it maybe 5 more seconds and then end the poll here. Alrighty, so just so everybody knows, looks like our majority of participants are early career today, and some spread across the board. Most people are practicing in an outpatient setting. That is where I'm currently practicing, so hopefully I have a lot to speak to there, but I'll try and touch on some other settings as well. And again, some more spread. I always wonder about this last question here. Us as sensitive therapists and mental health professionals, how many people would say ACT is my jam, but I just really wanted to put that question there. So thanks so much for participating. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about this today. Alrighty. So, it's always hard in a 1-hour presentation. There's so much that I would love to talk about, but I really tried to keep it fairly narrow for today. So my main goals for today are to help you better describe ACT and its core components in particular using age-appropriate language, especially because ACT can get so wordy and so heady. So how do we talk about this with kids and families? Specifically focus in on a couple of different ACT tools that you might be familiar with, you might not be familiar with, but really how do we adapt these for a younger population? And lastly, and probably most important to me personally, is to increase openness to some experiential exercises, which is one of the reasons why I was hoping that people would feel willing to have some of their own video on today, to be engaged, and also as maybe a little bit of a mini exposure or piece of committed action, assuming you're here because learning is an important value to you. So in that nature, I figured we would start with an experiential exercise. And I figured to get us all grounded and centered and feeling mindful and present in the activity, we would do a little bit of breathing. I'm feeling inspired by one of my clients who's, 10, 11, 12 right now. And her favorite of these breathing exercises is balloon breathing. So you can stand up if you feel comfortable. If not, get yourself in a mindful posture and, sit comfortably but alert. And we're going to try some balloon breathing today. So I want everybody to imagine, to put your hands around your mouth and as if you were about to blow up a balloon. I know for me it looks something like this. Hopefully you can see me. And we are going to take a deep breath in through our noses and out through our mouths, blowing up the balloon. In through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. I have a client who really likes to pop the balloon at the end because they always get really big. So if you want, you can breathe in and then breathe out so much that the balloon pops and like move your body in whatever kind of way you need to today. Alrighty, and feel free to use any of these exercises throughout the presentation if you need a little bit of grounding. So where I wanted to start was really how we introduce ACT to kids and families. So of course, what I say to every single client that I work with is ACT was developed within a coherent theoretical and philosophical framework. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a uniquely empirically based psychological intervention that uses acceptance and mindfulness strategies together with commitment and behavior change strategies to increase psychological flexibility. Psychological flexibility means contacting the present moment fully as a conscious human being and based on what the situation affords. And it cuts off a little bit with where I'm saying here, but obviously I'm being facetious here. This is not what I say to kids. It doesn't really matter how old they are. I don't say this to adults either. And depending on the day and how my brain is functioning, this would be hard for me to compute on any given day. So while I love this very scientific and in-depth description, I think it's really important, especially when we're trying to get families and kids and teens on board with therapy and on board with treatment, that we're explaining that to them in a way that they can understand in words that feel meaningful to them, and something that's consistent with their goals and really to help give them some buy-in. So really, when I'm explaining ACT to kids, I say our main goal here is to help you live a life that is meaningful and fulfilling. And we do that in 3 different ways. The first is to work on acceptance skills, which means being willing to experience whatever thoughts and feelings we have. Those are pleasant or unpleasant thoughts and feelings. Choosing, which means figuring out what's important to us and who is important to us, and then taking action. So finding small things that we can do every day that move us in the direction that we want to. And just for fun, I actually plugged in these 2 different bits of text into one of those. My school-based people out there are probably familiar with this. It's like, what is the grade equivalent of your text? And so the grade equivalent, just so you know, of the first text of this one here is something like 13.9. It's like the 14th grade is the reading level equivalent. Whereas the text on this page, it was something like the 2nd or 3rd grade. And so really trying to adjust that language in a way that most kids can understand feels meaningful and important to me, and is hopefully something that we're striving for. So these are sort of the pieces that I want to go through today, and we'll spend a little bit more time on either. Just as sort of a mental framework going into this, one of the things we want to be really cautious of is not treating our kids and teens, even if they're presenting in a really mature way, as mini adults. And really, there's a pretty big conceptual difference between how we think about ACT with adults. If you're familiar with it in that context, we talk about adults becoming afraid of thoughts or feelings, becoming really avoidant or really rigid in their actions, and ACT as a method of helping adults relearn how to turn toward values through their behaviors and as a way to actually reduce some of those symptoms. With kids, a lot of times they're coming in before these mental frameworks have been really fully established. And so we talk a lot more about modeling and shaping and acceptance, quite frankly, before those inflexible patterns have become really deeply established. So kids, for example, might not have as many experiences or say those things like, oh my gosh, yes, I've been this way my whole life, or yes, that feels really familiar to me. It might be something new and helping them make choices in the present, which is great because that's a really big part of ACT. So I was kind of chuckling looking at this slide because last March, actually, just before all of this craziness with COVID started, one of the very last things that I did in person was I got to see Steve Hayes come and present when he was in Salt Lake. And that was when we were doing hand sanitizer, but we weren't wearing masks yet, if that gives you an indicator of exactly when it is or when it was. And one of the things that he talked about that I really, really appreciated is that the main thing that we're keeping on the forefront of our mind when we're using acceptance and commitment therapy is that our overall goal is psychological flexibility. Because ACT, it has this really robust history and research backing behind it and all of these fancy scientific and complex words, sometimes that overarching goal can get lost in translation. So you can see the bottom line here. If you're familiar with the ACT hexaflex, really it's the 6 core processes of acceptance and commitment therapy. Attention to the present, self as observer, values, committed action, acceptance, and cognitive diffusion. And so really, I really liked his framework of 6 in 3 in 1, because it can help us stay oriented to that overarching goal of psychological flexibility. In addition to those sort of 3 ways, we're accepting, we're choosing, and we're taking action. The other way I'll often describe it to kids and families is by saying, what we're going to be working on is being present, doing what matters, and opening up. And obviously there's a lot more we could talk about with all of those, and what we will today. But usually those are words that most kids and most parents and most families understand. And the reaction I get most of the time is, oh, that sounds really interesting, or I'm really excited to do that. So it helps a little bit with that buy-in also. So I thought for starters, we would talk about being present, this first core component. And I don't know if you know these awkward Yeti little cartoons, but there's some true gold out there in them. This one I love in particular. I think I probably have another one later in the presentation. It's honestly quite hard not to put them on every single slide in my presentation. So when we're talking about being present, a lot of kids actually are really familiar with the term mindfulness these days. So that kind of gives us a leg up going into it. Lots of schools are doing mindfulness-based interventions, sort of out there in pop culture, social media world on, all of the different things. But one thing I try really hard to do is make sure that we have a shared definition of mindfulness and what it means to be present, that it's not based on a myth. And really, if we need to, overriding any negative experiences that a kid or a parent has had with mindfulness. So, the way I define mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment on purpose and without judgment. And sometimes if I'm working with a kid in session or if we're running a group, we can break down each of those components and see if there's any confusion about it or any miscommunication. The most important thing about mindfulness, though, I tend to not spend too much time on defining it or talking about the words, because really the most important thing about mindfulness is practicing it. So let's see, I tried to be fancy with some things here. Noticing what is happening right now, paying attention in a really specific way. This is one where that rationale piece is extremely important. So depending on what kids are coming in with, you might want to tailor your explanation. These are two ways that I sometimes describe it, especially depending if I'm working with a kid who's more in that externalizing end of the spectrum. I might say something like, mindfulness can help us put a space between our big emotions and our actions, especially if they're feeling frustrated, getting in trouble, feeling like the adults in their lives are disappointed. But for our more internalizing kiddos or teens especially, really focusing on the emotion side of things. So mindfulness skills can help us not get knocked down by emotions so easily, or if we get knocked down, we can bounce back a little bit faster. And so really trying to tailor it to, of course, what presentation your kiddo is coming in with or your teen. And then, of course, the most important part about mindfulness is practicing it. I'll usually say something like, we're going to practice mindfulness together today, or we're going to practice mindfulness together every day, or every time we meet together, but you're also going to practice every day when you go home with your family. This is also a really great opportunity for kids to become an expert in something and teach their caregiver or other people around them in their life, other adults in their life, what they learned in therapy. I find that to be especially effective with younger kiddos. With teens, generally have a little bit less parental engagement, but certainly sometimes with scaffolding, it can be helpful. All righty. Moving on to the doing what matters portion. So doing what matters, if you're familiar with the ACT hexaflex or those 6 core processes of ACT, doing what matters is where we have our values and where we have our committed action or our values-based action. And so really this is like, if we're talking about willingness, if we're talking about acceptance, if we're talking about why would I possibly sit with any of these hard feelings or learn this new thing or do this very difficult thing, this is the why for kids. It's what's most important to you and what is going to give you that life that you want for yourself, really. Not the life that your parents want for you or your teachers want for you, but really what you want for you. And the way that I introduce this to kids a lot of the time is first by talking about the difference between values and goals. So with values are things that are important to us, things that make our lives feel meaningful or fulfilling, and they are like a point on a compass, something that cannot be reached. So my favorite metaphor to be able to describe values to kids is talking about it like pizza. So I'll usually say something like, what's your favorite kind of pizza? If they say to me, pepperoni, I'll say, that's cool that you like pepperoni. My favorite pizza is actually veggie. Do you think that's wrong? Do you think that's bad? And they'll usually say, no, that's fine. You can like whatever kind of pizza you want. And so I'll usually say values are just like pizza. We all have different kinds of values. We all have different favorite values or things that we value in life. None of them are right or wrong, good or bad, but they're different. So it's normal if you have different values than your parents or than your teachers. The other thing I'll say is that values can change over time. So if I'm working with a 14-year-old, I might say, you know, what values you have now at 14 are probably going to be different than when you're 24, are probably going to be different than when you're 64. And that's normal and expected and okay. So we're just looking at what's important to you right now in this moment. Then I'll usually contrast this by talking about goals with kids. Sometimes kids are familiar, especially teenagers are familiar with SMART goals, you know, specific, measurable, attainable, yada, yada. But we really talk about how goals are something where you can check the box on them. So maybe you have a goal to score 3 goals in your soccer game this season. Or maybe you have a goal to get an A on a specific test, or maybe you have a goal to get your driver's license or get your first job. We can really check the box on these things. We can measure them, and we want to keep setting goals in life. Goals should always be in service of our values. And the most important thing I like to highlight when we're talking about goals is that we're constantly recycling them and working towards bigger and bigger things, but really reorienting to the larger pattern, the larger value that's at play. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about here. I think I have something else. Oh yeah, that's it. Another point of buy-in, if there's a little bit of conflict when it comes to talking about values, or even when it comes to talking about whatever it is that's bringing the kid into therapy, is that values and pain are two sides of the same coin. It's really, really hard to feel pain or feel any sort of unpleasant emotion if it's not something that we care about. So if a kid is getting frustrated that their parent keeps telling them to do their homework, that is actually a really nice avenue or window into, well, what about that is important to you? Or why does it upset you when parents ask that? What do you think is most important to them in this moment? What is most important to you in this moment? And most importantly, especially for kids or families that are coming in with really symptom reducing based therapy goals or treatment goals, saying like, I want to feel less anxious. I want my kid to stop misbehaving, anything like that. We really focus on not being able to get rid of one without getting rid of the other. And so really reorienting to things that kids want to add into their lives rather than the things that they want to take away. With adults, I'll talk a lot about dead man goals. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, but really kids, definitely teens, maybe kids get this too. So dead man goals are anything that a dead person would be better at doing than a living person. And usually people get a little bit of a chuckle at this. So if people are really hooked on the idea of, I can't give this presentation today until I don't feel anxious anymore. Or if my main goal is to not feel anxious anymore, you might say something like, well, would a dead person or a living person be better at that? And of course, they'll say, well, a dead person. And so really trying hard to reorient to living person goals. What would you, if you didn't feel anxiety anymore, what would you be able to do in your life? And what about that, or who is important to you related to that? And it's also really, because it's kind of silly, it can be a really nice bell of mindfulness for people, where you can later on sort of shorthand it and say, oh, is that a dead man goal or a living person goal? Something along those lines. All righty, let's see here. Thank you for the positive feedback in the chat. I appreciate that. Okay, and then our third component that we're going to focus on today is opening up. So this is really the acceptance piece of acceptance and commitment therapy. It means being open to all of the things that make us a living, breathing human being, all of the good, all of the bad, all of the ugly. And being able to notice those thoughts, those feelings, those sensations that show up, and then choosing flexibly whether we want to act on those things or not. One of the core processes that we'll talk about with this is cognitive diffusion, which really means separating who we are and what we do from the thoughts that we're having. The way that I'll talk about this with kids, I'll usually say something like, all right, I'm going to teach you a really big word idea right now. And I will actually tell them this word, depending, developmental level, of course, but a lot of times I will teach them the word cognitive diffusion. And then later on, we'll talk about things like unhooking from that thought or separating from that thought, things like that. But I find, even though this is a word, this is not a word that most adults would be familiar with anyway. So it's okay to teach a new word, teach new vocabulary, that sort of thing. There are a couple of pretty classic metaphors, I would say, in ACT that there's a lot of really good content on out there, so I won't go too in depth on them today. Passengers on the bus is a classic and one of my favorite metaphors. And the idea is, this is really focusing on that skill of externalizing. So if you have anxiety, what kind of anxiety would this look like? Can we caricaturize this anxiety? Is it kind of like a shy kid who's there to protect you? Or is it more like a big bully that pushes you around when you want to do something important? But almost like characterizing it, I'll draw this out with kids who are artistic or who like that thing, who like being creative, actually draw them out using cartoons, that sort of a thing. But the idea around passengers on the bus is sometimes those voices in our head or those feelings that we have get so big and so powerful that they start to think that they're in control of driving the bus. And so we're sitting there, we're the driver of the bus and we're driving along. But here we have like all of these passengers whispering or yelling or making a commotion in the back of the bus. And as we come upon these different choices in our life, so if I get home from school, do I have a choice to tell my parent about my day or go up to my room? And I'm feeling really, really down or really withdrawn. That voice might be saying something like, oh, don't bother. Mom or dad doesn't care anyway. It doesn't really matter. Just go up to bed. And so really trying to separate from our thoughts and see if we can make choices based on our values and what is most important to us rather than what those thoughts are saying. The other one that I use a lot more with kids than I do with adults is talking about thoughts as a superpower. So this is kind of a dated example. I'll usually ask kids for help with like more of an updated superhero analogy. They're usually pretty good at coming up with stuff, far better than I am. So I just rely on their expertise there. But thinking about like even Superman doesn't fly all the time. It would be really strange if Superman was like flying while he was eating dinner or flying while he was going to the bathroom or something silly like that. And so we have these thoughts and they're pretty amazing that we can have these thoughts, but they are a superpower and we don't have to use them all the time. We want to be able to, again, use them flexibly and really make choices based on what is most important to us. So that's an analogy I find that that works well with kids and with families as well. Alrighty, let's see here. Oh no. Okay. When we talk about cognitive diffusion or this idea of opening up, I really like to be specific with kids about the times when this is useful and the times when it's not useful. Like, we probably want to listen to our logic brain when we're taking a math test and we're trying to calculate things. But really, we want to listen to it mostly when it's going to be helpful for us. So if our mind is saying, hey, you practiced, you studied for this, you can do this, then that's a really helpful thought to listen to when we're taking a math test. If our mind, or if anxiety or if worry is saying like, oh, what's the point? You'll never be able to do this anyway. That's not a helpful thought. And so we don't want to listen to it. That's not one of the times when we would want to use our logic brain. In some of the Act for Kids materials, they'll call it our advisor. It's sort of our internal advisor. And that might be a time when we want to use cognitive diffusion. We can use it before, during, or after a challenging situation. We can use it even if there's a little bit of mild dissociation or numbness, like not really feeling or being connected to anything. We can use it if our minds are feeling judgmental. And then this last one I'm a little bit careful with, but especially for teens or folks who have like a little bit more of that ingrained, old familiar kind of thinking. I would orient, like, if that thought feels really familiar, if that thought feels really old, that's a time when we can use it also. Alrighty, so because one of my main goals for today is to get a little bit more comfortable with experiential exercises, I'm going to ask us to do another one. So I am going to, let's see, I'm going to pause sharing. I think that's what I want to do. Nope, I'm going to stop sharing. That's what I'm going to do. And I am really appreciative of all the people who have their cameras on already. If anybody feels comfortable adding their camera shot to it, go ahead. And if you don't, that's okay too. And so part of my value system is to really engage people in these processes. And I'm having a little bit of fear showing up for me right now. So I'm going to choose some values-based action. And not at this moment, but in a couple of moments, I'm going to actually ask everybody to unmute themselves at the same time, which feels really scary to me because I don't know how to remute everybody. So trust is also a value of mine. So I'm going to engage in a lot of trust right now that people are both able and willing to do that also. Okay, so before I ask everybody to unmute, I wonder if I could have one volunteer to share one worry thought or one thing that they're feeling worried, nervous, or anxious about right now in this moment for real. And you can maybe, like, I don't know, is that hand raising function available? Maybe that could be a good one to use. Or if I see people on the screen, you could, okay, I saw Carrie. So Carrie.
Oh, my background. How do I change my background?
Oh, and now I'm hearing Jessica. Okay, I think I saw a Carrie raise your hand.
Yes, I did.
Okay, can you, Carrie, share with me one thought you've been having recently, a worry thought, something that's making you feel a little bit worried, nervous, or scared?
It's taken me a long time to get all of my clinical hours for my license, 9 years to be exact. And I just got all of them and I need to send it all to the board. And they recommended that I write a personal narrative explaining what took so long. And I've been worried that when I do that, either I haven't given them enough information or I've given them too much, or they're going to kick it back and I'm not going to get my license. So I'm worried about that.
Yeah, so you're having a few different worry thoughts there, like, what if it's too much? What if it's too little? What if this doesn't happen or it gets kicked back?
Yeah.
Can you take maybe one of those worry thoughts and can you turn it into, distill it down to just one single word?
One word. Wow.
It can be a feelings word. It can be
anxious.
Anxious. Okay, perfect. Anxious. All right. I like that you chose anxious because what I'm going to ask everybody to do is actually like get in touch with their own inner feeling of anxiety. I am very in touch with this feeling at the moment. So I am feeling my heart racing. I actually like feel my heart beating in my stomach. I've been very, very sweaty all morning. Very sweaty all morning. Like feeling a little bit out of breath. Maybe you can all nod your heads if you're like feeling this, you can get in touch with this feeling a little bit. Okay. All right. So now what I would like everybody to do in just 1 second is we're all going to unmute ourselves and I'm going to set a timer on my phone. And we are all going to out loud for 30 seconds over and over and over again, about as fast as you can, say the word anxious over and over and over again. We're not chanting though. This isn't a cult. So we're not trying to like sync up with one another. So say it at your own rate here. So if everybody whoever has willingness, remember you are being recorded, but if everybody could go ahead and unmute themselves. And we will go ahead and start. So remember the word is anxious. And go. Anxious. I think we did it. So if anybody is still unmuted, you can remute yourself.
Anxious.
I'm not sure where the anxious is coming from. But I would love to hear, so I could hear from you again, Carrie, or I could hear from anybody really. You could even type in the chat. I love using the chat because we can like get more voices out there. So tell me like, how connected to you are you feeling to this feeling right now? Do you feel the same way about this word that you felt before? Yeah.
Did you want me to? No, I'm not. It kind of became silly. And like, I even forgot how to say the word after a while, after hearing it coming back at me.
Yes, I had that exact same experience. The last 10 seconds or so, I was like, I can't even make these mouth noises come out of my mouth anymore. Anybody else want to share a reaction or thought? Lots of agreement for you in the chat. That's great. Yeah, hard. It's especially with this large of a group of people, it's very hard not to giggle related to it, which is one of my favorite things about it. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I really appreciate everybody being willing to be brave. I'm assuming that was a toward move for you, moving in the direction of something that is important to you, whether that is being silly or being creative or throwing yourself into something or learning something new or trying something different. So I really, really appreciating that. Really, really appreciate that. Okay, let's see if I can get back to sharing. And I just found this meme and I was like, that's that's just it right there. That is the funniest thing ever to me. But essentially, I mean, so when we talk about avoidance in any modality of therapy that we're doing, and really something that gets in the way of making our lives bigger, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. Okie dokie. So I think the last thing that I might do here, I think I'm going to skip. We talked a little bit about acceptance. And there's a lot of really great resources out there. But I think what I'd like to do instead is actually use one more tool or one more new model or model that you might be familiar with, but really see if we can work on amending it to work better with kids, change our sort of developmental level that we're using it. So I don't know if people have access if you feel able to use the like yes, no button, maybe you could just quickly click that. Is this, sometimes we'll call this the stuck matrix or the psychological flexibility model matrix as it says on here. Using your yes or no, if you can figure out how to do that, can you say, is this something you're familiar with? Yes or no? Seeing some hand motions, some head nodding. Okay, all right. I'm not seeing the little things pop up on your picture, so that might just be something for me to figure out in my endeavor of lifelong learning. So this is one tool that we can use when people are feeling particularly stuck or particularly hooked on something that isn't useful, isn't helpful, isn't really getting us to where we want to go in life. I really, really love this. I use this with damn near every client I do ACT with. This is something that I use. But I found that it's really helpful to amend this when we're working with younger folks. There's a really great video, and so I'm pretty sure these slides are going to be sent out, and it's in my notes there, and I have a little bit of a resource guide at the end. So the video, there's like a great video on YouTube that you can watch. It's like 6 minutes, so not too super high stakes. But what I thought we would do is maybe just go through this together as a group. The first thing I'll do when I'm teaching this to people is I'll orient them. And a lot of times we have big whiteboards in our offices when we used to, be in person. And so a lot of times I actually won't show them this, but I will sort of have it in the back of my mind and I will draw it out on the board. So the first thing I'll do is draw out our big plus sign there. And I'll say, okay, on our horizontal axis, we have toward or away. A lot of kids will already understand toward versus away, what that means. But if we need to change up the language or use something a little bit different, we can also use language like closer or farther. So is that getting you closer to your value or farther from your value? Is that getting you, if your family is really important to you, is that getting you closer to your family or farther away from your family? Then I'll orient them to our vertical axis here. And this is usually complicated even for adults to think about. And so a lot of times I'll describe this as inside versus outside. So the questions on the bottom, we're really thinking about what is that internal stuff, either the things that we're feeling, the sensations that we are having, the thoughts that we're noticing. It's really that internal stuff. And it's also where the who and what is important to us lives. That's internal. Versus outside. So these are our actions, our behaviors, what we do. Sometimes you can start here, and that's where they start in the video. I'll often start here. And so if we have a particular topic, we can use this and we can ask questions like who and what are most important to you. So let's see. If I have, I have a lot of social anxiety cases right now. So maybe I can use something like that as an example. Let's see, I am working with a teenager who is having trouble in their romantic relationship because their partner wants them to spend time with their friends, but she feels extremely anxious. And so she'll often say no, like when her boyfriend asks her to spend time with his friends, she'll say no. And this is causing her a lot of distress because being a good girlfriend is really important to her. So when we ask about like who and what are important to you, she might say something like the ex's name, that person is really important to me. This is also where we can ask questions, especially for younger kids. They might not be able to say who or what is most important to you. So you might say, what do you like to do? Or what do you like about playing video games? Or what about playing video games is really important to you? Or who do you like to play video games with? Something like that. Then we'll move over to this side here. So remember, this is our side that's taking us farther away, but we're still talking about internal experiences. So this is what shows up on the inside that can stop us or get in the way of doing these things that are important to us, or being with the people who are important to us. So certainly this is emotions, fear, anxiety, worry. I feel nauseous. I get really sweaty. I don't want to be around my boyfriend's friends when I am sweaty, and I'm certain that they can all notice it. Thoughts that show up, that sort of thing. And then what do you do and then we move up here. So what do you do to move away from that unwanted stuff? This is often where a lot of avoidance will show up, or engaging in non-values-based actions. One way I like to describe this is what's making your life smaller. And then, of course, when we're talking about the other side, the values, it could be what could you do to make your life bigger? So before we're doing any problem solving, anything concrete at all, we're doing a lot of building and establishing motivation and buy-in and really focusing on what is most important to that kid. So it's not, I think it's a great idea to spend time with your boyfriend's friends, and so that's why you should do it. No, that's driven by this client's goals and what she really wants for herself and for her life. And really when we talk about like what is the values-based action or the committed action that we could do or that we could move toward, I will often say the smaller the better. The smaller and the more frequent the better. So even in the beginning, even if people are saying small things, I might really jokingly say, nope, smaller, that's too big. Nope, smaller, that's too big. We really, especially in the beginning, want to set people up for success and have some experiential learning that's going to be a little bit different than all of the learning or all of the avoidance that has told them before. Getting away, moving away from these things, or moving away from fear, anxiety, worry, any unpleasant stuff that's showing up, that, if it worked, it would have worked by now. And so we're really trying something else. The last thing I'll orient people to is the middle. And the idea is that we are the ones sitting in the middle. So we might notice that we're hooked over here, but really we can be a noticer, an observer. We can be a scientist or a discoverer and figure out how different things work. And it sort of opens up a little bit of choice. And most importantly, of course, flexibility in being able to choose what we would like to do. Would we like to move closer or farther? Would I like to turn my attention to what's going on the outside or what's going on the inside? Noticing that you're the driver of the bus and all of these other things are passengers. Okay, I'm just noticing the time, so I am gonna skip some of the stuff that feels so important to me. But I mostly wanted to also let you know that there's a really fantastic measure for assessing this. There is one that I know of. Actually, there's two, because there's this one, which is the full version, and then there's a shorter version. I think it's however many arrows there are there. There's 8. And so this is a really great, one of the things that kind of hangs people up about using acceptance and commitment therapy sometimes is, how am I measuring progress? How do I know if I'm moving in the right direction, if I'm being adherent to the model, that sort of thing. And so this is at least one concrete measure that you can use with kids that sort of get at those core ACT processes. One of my favorite things about acceptance and commitment therapy is the community around it, and the fact that basically all of the materials are open source. They are available online and everywhere, essentially. The best places I know, of course, the ACBS website is amazing. If you are not a member, if you're not familiar with it, they have values-based dues, which I just think is the coolest thing ever. There is a minimum, but I think it's like $13 or something like that. And basically you go on there and you can have access to like any ACT thing that has ever been developed, which is just the coolest thing ever. There's also a special interest group on there for children and adolescents, and quite frankly, more materials than any person could ever read in a lifetime, I think. The other website that I love is Louise Hayes, and I can never pronounce her like work partner's name, but they have developed a model for adolescent acceptance and commitment therapy called DNAV. And if you go to thrivingadolescent.com, there are books. These are 2 of the books that they have there. All of their materials, worksheets, there's videos. It's pretty amazing. And then this is that video that I was talking about. So let's see. I believe this will all be getting sent out to you. And so you should have access, but also I believe my email will be posted in the chat. And if you ever want to reach out, if you have any questions, I feel really open to hearing from anybody. Like I said, connecting with the community is really important to me. And so feel free to reach out there. You're all awesome. And let's see, I know we're just creeping up on our hour here. It goes so quickly. I clearly had lots of things that I would have loved to talk about, but I just wanted to see, I am happy to stick around for just a couple of extra minutes, but if anybody had a quick question or anything I could help clarify or answer. Otherwise, if you do need to go run to the bathroom before your next appointment or whatever it is, please go take care of yourselves. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for participating. Really, really appreciate it. And this brought me some joy today and some meaning and fulfillment. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for watching today's presentation, hosted by the Utah Center for Evidence-Based Treatment. You will be emailed the video recording, the presentation slides, and the evaluation quiz to revisit the material or complete the quiz at a later time. If you have any feedback for how we may improve our future events, please email events@ucebt.com. If you enjoyed the presentation today, please consider leaving us a Google review. The link to our Google profile is listed in the chat. We strive to disseminate the most up-to-date information in evidence-based treatments, and we look forward to connecting with you again in the future.